Please welcome Barrie Robb of Fivars Consulting and Terry Mitchell of ATCO Structures and Logistics with their presentation, Business-to-Business Partnerships Best Practices Fort Mckay First Nations. S'il vous plaît, veuillez accueillir Barrie Robb de la firme de consultants Fivars et Terry Mitchell de ATCO Structures and Logistics, qui vont faire ensemble une présentation sur les meilleures pratiques en partenariat d'entreprise chez les Premières Nations de Fort Mckay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Like others, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation to participate this morning. I did want to comment on what the mayor was saying earlier, Mayor Greenstone. I'm not sure what's in the water out in Greenstone, but Mr. Mayor, if you bottle that up, I think you could get a few people a little more excited, a little more enthusiastic, and drive these projects ahead further. Mr. Pelche, Elder Pelche, I'd like to thank you for your opening this morning, and to the singers as well. I thought it was interesting at the start of this workshop to have a chief, leader of the Métis Association, and the two mayors together. The symbolism is pretty strong. In the area where I work in northern Alberta in Fort Mckay, Fort Mckay is a First Nation community inside the oil sands, inside the municipality Wood Buffalo. And the strength of that region is due in great part to the ability of the mayors, the Métis leadership, and the First Nation leadership to share a vision, to share an objective, and to work together towards that objective. And it takes leaders working together to cause success to break out. And so to the mayors, to the chief, to the Métis, I congratulate you guys on getting started in your initial efforts in the first couple of years. I know it's not an easy thing to get started, and at times there will be bumps in the road. There will always be bumps in the road, but the stronger your working relationship, the easier those bumps are to handle, and they'll just look like a pothole in any other town. So let me try to begin. The first question in any community is whether or not development is an opportunity or is it not an opportunity. And it's a difficult decision. It's a decision communities will go through time and time and time again as projects come along. And there's arguments that are in favor of development, often around the economic side about jobs, wealth creation, and you get involved because it's a way to balance a proposed project and its development with environmental concerns and issues. Whoa, hang on here a minute. Can we go back to the first slide, please? And there's arguments about anti-development as well. It destroys ways of life. It weakens potential arguments into the future about treaty rights and those kinds of things. But I want to move forward on the argument that it makes sense. It makes sense from a development perspective, makes sense because it helps the economy. It's one of those roots that you need to strengthen, and you have some luxury of time to start developing some of those institutional things that will help you as you move forward. So if we look at a First Nation situation, I'm going to do this from a First Nation perspective for now. If we look at a First Nations perspective, in the current world, First Nations typically get about 90% or 80% of their funding from government, very little from anywhere else. The First Nation takes that money and has to run its own programs and its services, whether it's housing, whether it's school, social assistance, those kinds of things. And generally speaking, in the current situation, generally speaking, there's not enough money. And that leads to arguments between governments and First Nation governments and funding governments as to what Where is enough money? Where do I get the money to do these things? So as I say, I think there's a way to plan for the future, to manage development. And it starts to get rid of that issue around money. If you can manage a development, you can create wealth in a First Nation community and in a municipality. But specifically from a First Nations perspective, as you develop your economy and as you grow revenues and you grow wealthy, you really increase your independence. There's this ability to take off some of the shackles of governments telling you what you should do, how you should do it, what's good for you, when you should do it, because you have that independence. You can create employment. You can create business opportunities for your members. And there are many of those kinds of opportunities. But I do offer one observation. Be careful of people that are selling you a business opportunity and business partnerships that are sort of these too good to be true kinds of arrangements. You have to be careful. You have to do your due diligence, and you have to watch out. Watch out for companies and businesses that want to offer you a 10% deal. Or as they say in Fort Mckay, the Fort Mckay Council says, there is no way we're doing a rent of feathers. You can't come in here, rent our feather for 10% of something or other, and market yourself as a First Nation business. So conceptually, the strength that we've seen coming out of Western Canada in First Nations that build a strong economic base in their community is they end up creating something like a development corporation. It'll own a bunch of independent companies that each of those produce profits that go into the First Nation and add to the revenue stream for the First Nation. The development company, or the DevCo as I call it, really has two functions for your First Nation government. The first one is to make a profit and pay dividends into the First Nation government. That's one of its most important functions. Its second most important function is the creating of jobs and the creating of contracting opportunities. First Nation government role is really just to set profit targets. You back off and you let the people that you hire to run the DevCo, the Development Corporation, and the people in the individual businesses, you let them do the business work. I'm not old enough to need bifocals, it's just that I can't read close and far away at the same time. Individual companies that are part of your development corporation will come in a whole bunch of shapes and sizes. They will do different things. They will do things you don't even think about right now. In Fort Mckay and in other places in Western Canada, experience tells us that the most important thing you do is take your individual company and you connect it with an experienced service provider or a company that's known in the business. We'll talk, Terry will talk in a minute about ATCO and the camp businesses with Fort Mckay. Generally what you do in these kinds of individual companies that are part of a DevCo, you make sure the operating partner is good, he's well known in that business to the clients, to the people that you're going to sell your business to, and that he operates it, or they operate it. The Development Corporation brings an important element to this new business, this new individual company. That is, it brings Aboriginalness, if there's such a word yet. But what it does is it allows the company to say, this is the Fort Mckay ATCO company that runs and owns and operates a camp. And it brings ATCO, in that example, who are an accomplished camp provider, together with Fort Mckay. And so when we go and sell to Shell or we go and sell the camp to somebody else, we're selling both things. Aboriginalness is really important to corporate Canada, and especially to corporate Canada. If you ever look at corporations, big corporations' annual reports, often they'll have something in there about the social license to operate, which is the jargon that says we're good because we work with everybody in the neighborhood. I was on the phone the other day with a guy from Synovus who happily, he was kind of bragging, said, yeah, our company last year in our annual report, we reported that we spent, I forget, $398 million buying goods and services from Aboriginal-owned companies. Now, I didn't look at the breakdown of that, but I would venture to guess 3/4 of that is out of these individual companies that are part of development corporations. So you get a large percentage of that spend goes through these kinds of companies. And so that's why we want to try and suggest you position yourself now before the ring of fire really starts burning. To move to Fort Mckay, this is Chief Jim Boucher, who's been the leader in Fort Mckay now for about 20 years. And he says in that first quote, our people need to be employed, they need hope, and they need opportunity. And here's an opportunity, talking about the oil sands in northern Alberta, an opportunity for us to get on board. Just a little bit about Mckay. Mckay's a small community. It's about 700 people. It is literally situated right in the middle of the oil sands in the municipality of Wood Buffalo. So it's in a municipality, kind of like the Greenstone world, in the middle of a big, massive, world-class development, like the Ring of Fire is likely going to be. And here's the chief and his community that are saying, we need to seize the opportunities that are here. This chief is also the one who 20 years ago stood up in front of a company called Syncrude, which you might have heard of. They're a fairly large oil and gas, they're an oil company in the oil sands. And he stood in front of them and said, no development here until you figure out how you're going to work with the First Nations. And Syncrude up until that time wasn't even sure what a First Nation was, I don't think, or Indian person was. And so out of that kind of difficult start in the middle of the 80s, early 80s, there's been such a change that now you've got the First Nation, not just Fort Mckay, but all of the First Nations in the oil sands. The oil sands companies very, very integrated in terms of working together. They have their discussions on points that are where they have differences, but they're very tight together, and both governments, provincial and federal, can hardly believe it sometimes. They don't know how to deal with that kind of a working relationship. My point is, if you're working together, you can develop some pretty strong relationships. On Chief Boucher, as an example, in Alberta, one of the magazines there publishes a list of the 100 most influential people in Alberta. On a periodic basis, they publish that. Chief Boucher has been in the top 10 most influential people in Alberta every time they publish that list. So it shows you working together can produce some strengths. Fort Mckay is also a small First Nation. I think the official line is 700. It's probably about 550, plus a whole bunch of dogs that I think they count. But it employs or creates jobs for about 4,500 people on an annual basis. And how do they do that? Whoops, you were too far ahead of me. We want to go back to an org chart, kind of a picture that says Fort Mckay example. So when that slide comes up, what you'll see in the Fort Mckay example, one of us is going to, can you find that slide for me? It's the one right after the picture of the chief. So in the Fort Mckay example, there we go. What I'm trying to show you here is that in the earlier slide, you'll recall the revenues from government were very large. You'll see that they're downsized in this slide, and they're downsized to make the point, because it's correct. Mckay's revenue from government is actually around 5% of its total revenue stream. So it's gone from about an 85%, If you could leave that slide up, it would really be helpful, please. It's gone from 85% dependent on government to 5%. It gets its revenues that it uses through these long-term benefit agreements that they sign with developers that come into the area. But really importantly, it's under the business revenues. And in Mckay, they have business lines dealing with catering, with camps, with industrial parks. They've just started a drilling company. And we have a group of companies that own trucks like this that work on the mine sites. And part of what they do is they own the trucks, they have the operators, they do the maintenance of those trucks. Those are all jobs that are created. So when you see that big truck or a big hoe like this, you start shifting your mind around and say, okay, where are the jobs? Where are the business opportunities? All of those revenues flow into the First Nation government and allow the government then to provide programs and services. So when we go to the next slide, we can start seeing where some of the impact is. On the next slide, this is a picture of some of the new housing being constructed in Fort Mckay this past summer. But as I say, the impact here, as business grows and develops, you get tremendous financial independence. And in your community, it allows you to get on and make decisions about where you want to go without having to think about, oh, now do I have to run to the government and get government money, government permission, and do I have to fill in a lot of paperwork? Mckay is able to use its money to improve its community infrastructure and its community programs on the priority basis that they have. It's also important to remember progress does take a lot of time. In Mckay, this process was started about 15 years ago. No, sorry, now, almost 20 years ago. So the starting of the Development Corporation, the Mckay group of companies, all of those things are now about approaching 20 years old. So we got to have some patience in the community. We got to have patience to let our companies grow and let our companies grow to the point where we have some revenue coming out of them. In Mckay's case, and in many cases First Nations I work with throughout Western Canada, most will have this initial problem of where do I get the capital? We find that many will start with businesses that are less capital intense. And typically things like catering in the world in northern Alberta, because there's so many camps. And then you move to something that's much more capital intense. And so now 20 years after we got started in Mckay, this summer in Mckay we launched a drilling business. So because we're in oil, you need drilling equipment. It's expensive. And since the summer, we put between us and our partner, we've got $15 million we put into that company to get it capitalized. So you can see that you start with less than capital intense, so that means you generate more revenue on a monthly basis or an annual basis, to more capital intense, where it takes you 3 or 4 or 5 years for the revenues to start to come in. When they come in, they're a little bigger. That picture actually is the band office in Fort Mckay. This is a picture of the arena, and I figured for those, because we're talking with people who live in the north, you recognize the thing in the front, the main mode of transportation. But in getting into business in Mckay and in lots of other places in Canada, a lot of other First Nations say there's some principles. It's important that we own 51%. The First Nation owns 51% of the company. It's important to the First Nation that it sits on the board of directors. It sits on the board of directors because it then can make decisions about direction and priorities. It can approve the budget. And it can share the risk, and it can share the reward. As I think we all know, not all businesses make lots of money. Some don't even make any money at all. So that's sharing the risk. Sharing the reward is when you make money. Just to touch quickly for a couple of minutes on characteristics of what makes a good joint venture partner. The word trust and respect are the words that are important. Somebody used those earlier today already. When Fort Mckay, and I do this work for Fort Mckay as their CEO of Business Development, when we go and look for a new business partnership, we look for somebody we can trust, somebody that's got respect, respects the First Nation community, respects the environment that we're working in, respects the way we want to do business, and has got the respect of people who are clients. Because you have to be very good at your job, best in class, and you have to be respected by those you provide service to get work. So you have to have that kind of credibility. It's important that they are prepared to develop working relationships and maintain those with the First Nation. It's not just develop them once, not just sign an agreement, but to maintain them. Training, employment, contracting, those are all very important. It's also important that they understand that you want to be, as a First Nation, be involved in the joint venture operations. And as I said in the last point in that slide, be very wary of somebody who comes along and says, Chief, have I got a deal for you? I've got a thing I can sell for $1,000 an hour. You don't do anything at all, just let me use your name and I'll give you $100. In Alberta, there's many, unfortunately, examples of those where Métis organizations and First Nation organizations have entered those kinds of deals and ended up with less than a cup of coffee by the time the deal is done. From a First Nation perspective, the responsibility is around marketing and promotion, advocacy with your clients. It's your business. Get out and sell it to the developers that are in the neighborhood. You've got to be tenacious with that. It doesn't end. It's also important to keep politics out of the running of the business. Let the business run as a business. You went and got into business to make money. You went and got a partner who was good at making money, good in the business and good at making money. Let them do that for you. Keep your focus on profitability. And use your board of directors' role to direct the company, whether they're environmental issues, labor issues, or whatever. And I guess as I close, don't be afraid to dream. And don't be afraid to dream big. These two pictures of a bit of that symbol. Picture on your left when you're looking at these is what was jokingly called in northern Alberta the bridge to nowhere. On the south side of that bridge is part of Fort Mckay's land, and on the other side is Fort Mckay's land. When this bridge was built about 20 years ago, there was nothing, quote, quote, north of that bridge. If you could just hold the picture up, please, that would be really good. And today, there are 12,000 vehicles a day crossing that bridge. In the peak hour, there's 1,200 go by the Mckay corner, as we call it, just on the south side of that bridge. My point is somebody was thinking ahead. Somebody said, look, there's going to be a bunch of development here. Let's get the infrastructure in place to allow that development to happen. On the right is a piece of the Dempster Highway. I use that picture simply because I've listened to the leaders in Greenstone and some of the First Nation communities in that region and in Thunder Bay here. The purpose of that picture is really to say, you need a road. Don't be afraid to dream about how together the First Nations, the municipalities, working with the province and the feds, could own that road. You could collectively build it, own it, and operate it, and rent it to somebody like Cliffs or whoever, Company A, Company B kind of thing. So don't be afraid to dream big. It's important. Because it's really about thinking about the future. What's this place going to look like for my grandkids, for your grandkids? Are they going to have a foundation on which they can build for their grandkids? And I think that's the objective. So thank you very much.
To continue on, I'd like to invite our next speaker to come up. His name is Terry Mitchell, and he is a senior manager with the Aboriginal Business Development sector of ATCO Structures and Logistics. Terry?
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. You know, it's always a tough act to follow Barrie Robb. He's got the coolest socks. He's got these socks that are all striped and everything. I actually don't have any socks on. I'm just kidding. I have socks on, all right? So, all times then, not 10. Thank you very much for having me here. My name is Terry Mitchell. I'm Senior Manager for Aboriginal Business Development for ATCO Structures and Logistics. I'd like to thank the Medicine Wheel Spirit Singers this morning for a nice song. Always excellent to start off with that, and certainly to our Elder Victor Pelche for a wonderful blessing, and how much certainly always I feel better right now for the blessing, and thank you for taking the time to do that from your First Nation Fort William, which I happen to be on the traditional territory of today, and from our nation, Heart Lake First Nation in Northern Alberta. Thank you for having me here, and a welcome from our nation to yours. I'd like to also welcome all the elders. I would like to pay homage to Chief Nelson. Thank you for being here today, and to any of your council members that are also here. To my Métis friends, leaders, Barrie Lipinski, President of the Métis Nation of Ontario, for the guests, organizers of Expo. Thank you for having ATCO here, and for me to have the opportunity to talk about our partnership with Fort Mckay. Also like to thank very much for the warm welcome to the organization committee, particularly Mayor Bolio. Nice welcome, very enthusiastic, and certainly always share an energy like that, so hopefully I can be as enthusiastic as you are this morning, so thank you. And I know that Bruno wanted me to really keep on schedule and keep on time, which made me think about something. You know, these green lights here, it's St. Patrick's Day, right? I mean, you know, it's a pretty cool day to be up front here. And one of the first jobs I ever had, I was working for a company that was selling furs, and we used to bring the furs in from Winnipeg and then make fur coats out of them, things like that. Anyway, Vince McKenna, who happened to be an Irishman, was my first boss. And he said, "Terry, you don't have a watch." And I said, "Vince, I don't have a watch." He says, "You got to get a watch, Terry, so you can be on time and be on schedule. Otherwise, you're going to get the curse." I said, "What's the curse, Vince?" He said, "Terry, the curse, this is a curse of Mary Malone and her 9 blind, illegitimate children will chase you so far over the hills of damnation, Terry, that not even the Lord himself would be able to find you with the reversed end of a telescope, and I haven't been late since." All right, so I'm going to start off with that. So, well, thank you very much. I guess, Chris, I just hit this little button here and we begin. I'd like to talk a little bit about ATCO. And I just got to figure out who do I... Hey, Chris, are you around? A little technical issue with... There we go. Thank you. So you can see from the slides on the right and left the organization that ATCO is. We have 9 principal operating divisions, or principal operating subsidiaries, they're called. We have approximately just under 10,000 employees, publicly traded. You know what I'm not going to do? You know, you go to enough meetings, right? And you get some guy standing at the front and he reads the bullet point one by one. You're sitting in your chair going, you know, I think I actually can read that. You don't need to do that. So I have some wonderful news. I'm actually not going to do that. So I'm just going to sort of highlight a couple of them and just sort of move on to the next one, so you can sort of see the size and the breadth and the width of the organization that I'm representing today. We're headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, established in 1947 by Ron Southern, managed and president and CEO right now is Nancy Southern, and just a wonderful organization to work for in terms of supporting the Aboriginal community. And again, you can see some of the different things that we do. Now, in terms of those principal operating divisions, the one I'm representing is the one with the circle on it. And there we go, that worked. It's pretty slick, I just don't know where to point it here. So you can see where the circle are, representing structures and logistics, and we have another division, sustainable communities, which does the buildings, educational schools, training facilities, kitchens, things like that, smaller facilities. Structures and logistics, we build and do workforce accommodation. So we build the big camps, drill camps, anything from, just picking a number 100 up and plus, drill camps, things like that. Anything that's associated with mining, energy-related, oil and gas. Currently, revenue of the organization is just under $16 billion annually. Assets even in excess of that. And operating profit and capital per year is always very positive, as the organization is run on very strong partnerships and having a good business model. In terms of the international capability, you can see some of the different places that our organization operates out of. And again, this is a slide that speaks for itself. Now, ATCO Structures and Logistics, we have some different areas here, but particularly the one I want to zero in on is the lodging and the camp services, because in this particular area here in Greenstone, what's going to end up happening in the territory here is that you're going to run into a lot of mining projects, could be copper, palladium. Organizations will come in and they're going to be needing some they're going to be somewhere to live, somewhere to stay, and they're going to need somewhere to eat. And you're going to have to be partnering with organizations that will be able to provide that service. There's going to be many local ones that will provide very good service, and all the power to them. When it gets to a certain level, though, in terms of capacity, just as Fort Mckay had run into, you're going to need organizations that have the financial oomph behind them and the ability to be able to deliver on large projects. And we're quite capable of doing any size of project. We have a 250,000 square foot manufacturing plant in Calgary, plus we're spread out just about, as you saw earlier in the international listing, all over the world to be able to provide those services to any organization that needs to be able to house people or feed them. We have other site services, facility operations and maintenance, which is on that, was on the bottom of that one slide there. Thank you, Chris. But in that particular case like that, I'd like to be really sensitive to this. This is the opportunity for the First Nation to be able to use or our own people to be able to provide these services while partnering. And Barrie alluded to a little earlier, having these joint ventures, these companies that will funnel in and provide these services. I mean, even those tires, we were talking about that a little earlier, those tires on those big ukes were like, they're $75,000 a piece. Boy, I'll tell you, when your boss says you got a flat tire, you want to change a tire, you want to make sure you're not driving that vehicle. But my point behind that is somebody has to do it. And if I recall, Barrie, from a discussion we had earlier, Fort Mckay had to build a plant that cost $1.5 million. So just even building that plant, somebody had to build the building, site level, grading, everything that goes with it, and then there's mechanics, there's a whole bunch of jobs that come out of that. So there's a lot of activities that can happen from just a single project. These are some of the other ATCO structures and logistics product and services that we provide. Particularly, though, it's that top left-hand one. We have a particular department that engages with the communities. It's Aboriginal Business Development, Aboriginal Relations Management. So we're split into two. Big difference when working with organizations, because there has to be a building component and there has to be a maintenance component in working with our partners. And in terms of working with partners, one really can't be without the other. So, for example, I would be involved in doing the joint ventures between our organization and the First Nation to ensure that the joint venture is mutually beneficial from the real sense of the word. And it isn't something where, I really like, Barrie, your terminology of using the rent a feather. That sort of thing just doesn't work. We end up having to do joint ventures which are going to be profitable for the First Nation, while at the same time creates an opportunity for our organization to be able to create shareholder revenue. But if I can just take something, from the bridge, on one side of it, on one side of that bridge, there's going to be a sign that it says increase shareholder value from the corporation. That's what the corporation has a mandate to do. And on the other side of the bridge, we have to be very responsible for our community. There's going to be a whole bunch of things that have to happen for economic capacity, economic development, and certain things as labor market strategies, and being able to hire people within the First Nation and within the local Métis communities and within the local community itself, all combined, all working together to be able to share in the model to generate some newfound revenue so that everybody can win. And that's a real difficult thing to do sometimes if everybody's on a different page. So the idea is to bring it all together. So we have two departments that actually do that. So our Aboriginal Relations Department would come after and make sure that that's sort of in place and that those things are actually being engaged and they're actually being executed. These are some of the facilities and some of the building structures that we do. We do lunchrooms, I said earlier. We have that division which is Sustainable Communities, which is engaged directly with working with the First Nations. And I want to bring, just lighten this up a little bit and mention to you all that it's going to be the local First Nation that's going to have a traditional territory that the operators are going to have to come into, or whatever that particular community is, or whoever owns that, and they are then going to require this workforce accommodation and the catering side, so that the organizations can live in there. And that's really making it as simple as possible to show where the revenue generation model can come from. And Fort Mckay is very successful in doing that. There's 611 First Nations in Canada specifically, Métis Nation communities within every province of Alberta, one of the largest and most powerful ones being here actually in Ontario. And it's important to know that probably right at the moment there's a handful that can really have the capacity and the leadership to really pull off these projects. So when organizations like Fort Mckay come up and Barrie and are able to discuss how this works, it's really powerful information to take back to the communities, because it's really sort of learning from the professionals that have already been there. And it takes strong leadership like Jim Boucher. There's a few I can think of, but the real power and to their success is quite simply this. There is a chief and council. There is an electoral process that's in place that runs every 3 to 4 years, but there's an autonomous division which is a business operations unit, and that business operation unit is very deep, it's complex, it has it's a separate operating structure from the political side, and it's a very, very wise move to do and very powerful for those organizations that are moving forward right now. Again, you can see some of the other items and structures that we do. We are into the construction camps. We can build construction camps. We'll partner with the subcontractors within the territory. Generally speaking, there's a whole bunch of things that are involved with that. It can be the logistical side on the trucking, the site leveling. There's a whole bunch of added value services that can attach when doing camps. Specifically, we're in the rental business, so we would end up renting to the operator. And again, you can pick whoever that company may be, pick the name. Give you another slide here of some of our permanent modular and prefab building structures that we do. We'll zero right in on the lodge side, and I'm going to get into this in a minute, on the Cree burn and barge landing facilities. Seniors and affordable housing. The seniors and affordable housing are really good legacy plans within partnerships, because what they do is after the joint venture is over, or after the project is over, unless I'm just going to pick a name, ABC Mining Company leaves, what did the company leave there as a legacy for either your community or for the community that it operated into? And a lot of joint ventures are being built right now where that's included within it. So it's really important to know when doing those that that's available. By the way, these companies are interested in doing that because they do want to work with the local communities and be engaged. That's part of the mandate. Specialty products. You can see some of the other ones we do. The blast-resistant modular buildings are actually the newest ones at that center slide. Those are pretty slick. Really particularly good for drill camps. You get into the areas where there's SAGD development and a lot of drilling and things like that. And in particular with I can't speak so much to the mining side because I'm not that familiar with it in terms of whether that would be required for it or not. But I do know for the territory that we're operating in right now that those have become a very HSE-related important building to have. And a lot of the organizations and the corporate organizations within the Calgary area, or the western areas right now, are very centrally focused on health and safety and environmental, and it's not going to be any different operating anywhere within Canada. Now, what we do, this is our forte, it's workforce accommodation, it's the CAM services. We primarily do the catering, food services. We are the turnkey solution. We're not split. There's some organizations that will do just the catering, some will do just the fabrication of the buildings. We do both. So really there's a lot of power in that because we have the capacity to do that, and you don't have to worry about doing double dealings or if one contract ends or having to worry about the fulfillment of the project. Very, very proud to say that we are partnered with Fort Mckay First Nation. This is Creeburn Lodge. And for those who haven't been there, I mean, this is a world-class, first-rate lodge. When you walk in, it's got a great big foyer in it. It's got offices, a reception area. It's just gorgeous, and it's a joint venture that we have with Creeburn Lodge. I mean, you can do the numbers. This is a tremendous revenue generator for First Nation and for the operator that's operating there. Now, really, the component piece of this that I would like you to sort of wrap your head around a little bit is that there is operators within the area. They could be doing a mining project. Again, they're going to need to stay somewhere, and some people don't want to stay in a camp. It just doesn't work, or some organizations don't want their people to stay there because they want to have a different type of facility. Well, you have some great options if it's going to be a long-term project. And in this particular case, for example, with Creeburn Lodge, which was on that slide over there, and then thanks, Chris. This one here, it provides an opportunity for workers to live in comfort. And I'm going to get into a slide which does give an option, but again, at least you have choices. And this joint venture, again, I want to emphasize, is on Fort Mckay on reserve. Second one, can we just go back on that one just a bit, one slide? Thank you. This is Barge Landing Lodge. The operator that's on there right now is Shell. And this one also is a joint venture with Fort Mckay. And this one here, though, you'll notice the structural side of it, these are, majority will be Jack and Jill. So, really you have a choice of going into sort of three choices actually in the workforce accommodation. It's gang style. That's where somebody lives in a small room and you have to go down the hall and you're all going to share the same washroom. That isn't too exciting. And that's really going into the past a bit. And we're not finding that one being as popular as it used to be. The second one stage of development for camps has been Jack and Jill. So that means that, Terry's got one room here that's roughly about 100 square feet. I have a bed, a television, my good friend Barrie would be living, he would be in the other room, we'd be split with a washroom, and that's the living environment. The door's locked, Barrie, I just want you to know that. So the doors can be locked from the inside, so one can't, you can't be both in there at the same time. And that's J&J. Somewhat still operates within the oil sands, and you still see a lot of those around right now. But the most popular coming out right now is the management. And those where there's a three-piece ensuite washroom, and you'll have the shower, the sink, and the toilet right in one room, or they might sometimes have the sink on the outside, just depends on the structure, and then a nice sized bed. You're getting wireless, you're getting big screen TVs, you're getting a closet, it's carpeted. It's actually really, really nice to be in. And the big operators, which will be the mining companies that are going to be coming into the Green Store area to operate, like those structures, because what they're able to do is attract workers to stay. And that's kind of where you want to be in. You want to be in one of those rooms. And so What Fort Mckay has done has given an option to the operators where they want to stay, and that's a very wise move. So it had not limited any of their options available to be able to track revenue generation. You can put some numbers to this. I can't give you the range of revenue that come from it, but just take the average price of $200 per person per day on a 36-month contract. Times it by approximately 500 people. So you can do the math on that. Just figure that out, and you can see that it's probably creates opportunity. Now, this one here is a slide on Aboriginal partnerships. Barrie used the word earlier. I've heard it this morning from some of the opening speakers, was the respect for partners. Not any different. We partner with the communities. We start off, and I'll get to that in a moment, our process that we go through. And give you an idea, too, of some of the types of partnerships we've done so far. These are a good idea of our joint ventures, MOUs, and strategic alliances that we have with First Nations and Métis communities and Inuit in Canada. All-encompassing word, right? And we have 27 partnerships right now and growing. I personally, right now, and within our team, we have, I can say to you, another 22 on the move. It's really, really growing, and it's growing rapidly. And actually, it's beginning to come this way. You can see, I don't know if you can go back to that map for a moment. You can see on the eastern part that you're going to see a real movement towards coming this way for organizations like ATCO working within the communities to be able to provide some opportunities together mutually, and there is a growing trend for that. We have some initiatives right now that are taking place to make that happen. This is a type of engagement plan that we do, and when you look at that, I just pretty much pick up on the four main pillars, which is the employment, the training, subcontractors, and community projects. Subcontractors come mostly from our First Nation partners. And they will have the license to be able to determine who that will be, and it is our responsibility that we look for those local suppliers and keep everything local. So it's nice to have organizations that want to work with the local community, and that's the type that both within here and within the First Nations that you look for partners that have that ability to do that. I want to go into this one slide here, which I said I'd get to in terms of depth of an organization. It kind of gives you an idea of our the type of on how we split it between the business development and Aboriginal relations. We have about 25 people in total now that within our particular division for doing business with Aboriginal communities. In most organizations, there might be two people. So you have to get a really good idea here, a good sense that you have a major corporation in Canada, which does in excess of 16 billion. Right now is on a growing trend to be able to really engage within the Aboriginal community, and we see the value in working with the Aboriginal communities, all 600 plus 10 in Canada, to be able to work with the operators to mutually build some synergy together for building revenue generating real projects. And our commitment to that is having a very large team available. I promised I'd go through a couple slides where I wouldn't read the bullets, right? Yeah, so said I wouldn't do that. Now, I'm just getting towards the end here, just a couple slides to go, 2 left. I really want to emphasize what makes a strong partner for us. It's for you, your communities here in your area, getting organizations that have a lot of experience. They have the capacity, the strength to be able to handle if the project goes a bit bigger. Let's just say, for example, there is a Palladium project going on, and it's a 500-person camp, and all of a sudden something happened. There needs to be some expansion. You're going to need a partner that can actually have the capacity to be able to immediately address the expansion going from 500 to 1,000. That is a big deal. There is a whole bunch of mechanisms that have to be kicked off and has to be kicked off quick. So that's one of the things that one has to look for. The third one I'd say is really important is a turnkey solution. Splitting catering between workforce accommodation is really problematic because you don't really get your, well, here, you just don't get your best revenue share out of it because you're having to split the revenue, or the catering company is going to have to go third party on the workforce accommodation, or the workforce accommodation person or company is going to have to third party on the catering. That means there's less of a profit share for the First Nation, or it could be a local, less of a profit for the local community, or for the suppliers get split in too many different directions. We also do a lot of the EPCM work, and as you saw a little earlier, and it's the very bottom bullet, where our expansion within Canada is growing at a very rapid rate, I might add. How do we work together? How do we work together with Fort Mckay First Nation? Great partner to work with. You know, Barrie, Chief Boucher, 20 years plus, you know, if there's any strength in that is that he's been in leadership for such a long time, there hasn't been a turn in there, and has now really being able to have simultaneously be able to work straight across all of those years, build a team, there's no change, there's some continuity, there's a real lot of power in that. You see a lot of change in different organizations continuously, no different than any other corporate organization, lots of change, lots of turn means decreased productivity. So the real strength of Fort Mckay is having some very strong leadership, but very clever band in terms of they've brought from outside people, the professionals, to come in to be able to assist them to take them to another level. So you can see from that one slide, it's mostly the revenue sharing, which I just talked about. I'll leave in my last slide now, which I just turned off. There we go, is the next step. So how does a partnership get done? Well, this is start off with a memorandum of understanding. For you companies that are out there, I'll share this with you. You know, knocking on the door of trying to do business with First Nations and dropping down an MOU right away doesn't really cut it. There's got to be a real understanding of learning to work with your communities locally, whatever Aboriginal community it is. Get to know who your partners are. Get them understand them from a personal level. It's really important to know whether that partnership is going to go anywhere. What's the character from both sides? And then be able to initially address it from coming in with a draft paperwork. A lot of corporations like to come in and just sort of drop the bomb right away. Tough battle. Seen it happen many times, and that's not really the best way of doing it. But if it works for you, great. Second best part to work with, and after the MOU is done, is creating a joint venture, and those are developed through discussions, and those generally take about anywhere from 6 months to a year to get going. You know, really a draft MOU, when you begin something in terms of from a business perspective, is I love you, you love me, we're going to sort of go through this relationship, we're going to try to figure out if this is all going to work, and then we're going to take it to a very serious level of doing a joint venture. And the joint venture has a lot of conditions and terms within it. That's the piece right there that's going to be the most powerful for both partners. And I must say that requires some time and due diligence. And then last, it's executing it. And that's be able to ensure that all communities have some capacity that are long-term from this. Thank you very much for the opportunity for having me up here today and sharing this with you. Yeah, I think, you know what, thank you for starting that. That's a great segue, because I think there's going to be a question part, yeah. And if it's a really hard question, Barrie said he'd take them all, and I'll take the easy ones, okay?
These are friendly questions, and I've said an inquiry. I have a grandson who worked in the oil sands last year, and he told me about this 51% for of native participants in the boards, but he said where he was driving, that means the corporation just has a tax write-off. That's what the 51% is for. And the particular reserve he saw where this was operating looked like a third world country, and it was black with smoke. The other thing he told me was that they sell Percocets and sleeping tablets in a push machine, like you get Cokes, you know, for the workers, which doesn't go with the health and safety laws in the rest of Canada. That's unusual. And or the accommodation and catering, I was just wondering, at what point do the Aboriginal people get trained for more professional jobs? You know, like surveying and the engineering, like the big, do they get a chance to be trained so that they're not always in a subservient place of catering and building?
Well, wow, okay. That's a great question to start off with. And there's a couple answers to that. Number one, firstly, it's your son coming back with some very good information for you. And his observations were that, from what I would have to say, you can have some really good partners, and you can have some really bad partners.
Yeah, you did mention that, I understand that, yeah.
And you know, from what you've been hearing this morning, it's really important to pick out who your partners are going to be. And that's why I said a few minutes ago, you really got to take your time and do your due diligence who they're going to be, because you can run into some really bad partnerships, and you've just given some excellent examples of how they can be. And if there is machines that are in a particular location that shouldn't be, let me assure you, from the companies that I have been dealing with and the ones that are global, worldwide, that have some really stringent and strict HSE rules, I even ran into a major corporation, I won't mention the name, very reputable, well, you know, I will mention it, very reputable firm, for example, like a Conoco, who alerted me to the fact that one day one of the machines had something in there that, you know, just didn't meet their HSE standards. That machine was pulled out instantly. So it depends again who the partner is. It's a wonderful observation, but one has to take the time to do that. Now, in terms of the Aboriginal communities and for building training programs, again, it has to be the mandate within the organization that you're coming in with partner. Do they have capacity building projects? By the way, most First Nations, as anybody, don't want just a job. We want careers. I want to be trained. I want to have something that's transferable. And the one thing I can mention to everybody in the room is, for example, when you get a large organization like ATCO operating worldwide, we have skills that can be transferable from one division to the next. So pick your partners, be prudent, take your time, and don't run into the problems you ran into. Really glad you shared that, because there's lots of them out there like that.
Yeah, I just about the 51% though, is that across the board, so any big stakeholder can come in and get a tax write-off?
You know, if the company's doing it because of a tax write-off, boy, I'll tell you really want to question
No, but they
that.
all get it though, don't they?
Pardon me?
Does everybody get it?
Barrie, I'd like you to talk about the tax structure from a First Nation perspective. Maybe that's a...
I'm not a tax lawyer, so that's the first disclaimer. But the way the tax, when you set up a corporation, like the ones we've talked about, the one we have with ATCO, it's 51% owned by the First Nation, 49% owned by ATCO. If that company, if the individual person who works in that company is working on a reserve, they earn their income on a reserve, that individual's income, regardless of where they work in Canada, as long as they're working and earning income on reserve, then they are exempt from paying income tax on that income if they're status Indian. On the corporate side, we have a mechanism that allows the company to make money. We, First Nation, extract our dividend, our profit. It comes into the First Nation, and because the First Nation is a government in Canada, we have a mechanism that allows money to be donated, the profit to be donated to the band. So in our case, the money comes in from the company, goes to the DevCo, and it's donated to the band. That keeps us, we pay $1 for tax, and we pay the rest to the bands. So it's tax-free on the band side. On ATCO side, that profit that comes out of the JV goes into ATCO, and ATCO pays tax on it because it's part of its profit structure.
Oh, well, thanks for answering. I don't understand it, but I just wanted to...
Okay. And on the Percocet and on the drug stuff, Terry's on the mark. On the sites in Fort McMurray that are owned by the big companies, they are adamant about health and safety stats. In fact, when we go to bid a job, when we're running these big trucks, or when we're doing camps, a big part of the evaluation of our proposal, of our bid to get the work, is how good are our health and safety stats. And if they're not good enough, we don't get the work. I mean, you have to be priced and all that kind of stuff too, but so thinking that there's vending machines that offer Percocet, cocaine, and all that kind of
There's
stuff.
sleeping tablets and Percocet.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't imagine any reputable firm, doing that, let alone condoning it. And if they find anybody doing it, all the ones I know up there would turf the person. And that would be the end of the business relationship.
Thank you.
Just for these training programs, are they strictly for First Nations, or can an ordinary person join them, and the apprenticeship?
We'll share the answer. Okay. In our case, in Fort Mckay, training is part of every one of our joint ventures. Fort Mckay has 700 members officially. We create 4,500 jobs. So do the math. We got 6 jobs for every person that's a band member. So we have to import a lot of people, right? We have probably, if you went in the band office in Fort Mckay, I think the most common language would not be Cree, would not be Dene, it's probably Newfoundlandese or something else. So we bring in a lot of people. A lot of those people are eligible and would participate in those job training programs. But we do put the JVs together, the businesses together, because we want to create opportunities for the Fort Mckay members. Now, Fort Mckay is kind of special because the Métis and the First Nation basically share the same community. They work together on businesses and things like that. So there's not a differentiation between Aboriginal or between First Nation and Métis. It's basically everybody on the Aboriginal side.
Okay, thank you. And just another thing, where is Fort Mckay? Is that near Calgary, or what city is it near?
It's just north of Calgary. It takes about an hour in a plane to get there. So it's about a 6-hour drive. Oh, actually, I think officially it's a 7.5-hour drive from Calgary to Fort Mckay. So it's just north of Fort McMurray.
Okay.
It's on the Athabasca River, shores of the Athabasca River. And our neighbors are, non-Aboriginal neighbors are Syncrude, Suncor, Shell, Husky, CNRL, Total, and anybody else I just missed in that list. We're totally surrounded. We're in the middle of the Ring of Fire, or the oil sands. It's interesting, the we, right? Here's the white guy and the Indian doing this, and usually the roles are kind of reversed here, but anyhow, that's what Mckay's like.
And I just need a phone number for Mr. Terry Mitchell for ATCO. You didn't give anywhere where you can be reached, or
No problem. I'll give you my business card.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to just, we're trying to get back on schedule, so we're a little bit behind. So I'd just like to thank both Barrie and Terry. There's a little token of the municipality of Greenstone's appreciation. Thank you very much. Very informative conversation, gentlemen, and I'd just like to encourage you, if you want to talk to the speakers afterwards, I think most of them are kind of going to try to stick around. Those that have schedules and have to leave, they will obviously have to do that. But if you have some questions, feel free to engage with them one-on-one. We're going to take about a minute and 30 seconds, put a couple of tables up here, and we're going to start with the private sector funding forum. I know there's been a lot of interest in that one. That's coming up. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your presentation. It was very informative.